Hey, this is Tanya, and we kind of left you with a cliffhanger on the resentments, justified resentments. And so we're going to pull that together with some tools on how to manage those resentments and how to make your life better.
Real life for real families. Hurts, habits, and hang-ups happen in every family.
Jerry and I are here with tools to help you trust God, clean house, and tell the truth to ramp up the joy in your family.
You have what it takes.
It's time to become sober on purpose
For his purpose.
And this is why we need two mics, because we're having to practically sit on each other
It's
to
like
do
a
this.
hockey game we're trying to get in.
Okay, so we were talking about justified resentments and whether they are beneficial to you or not, because you have every right to have resentments on people or situations, or you can have, we're in the library right now, you can have it against organizations that have harmed you. You can keep those resentments as long as you want. What we were talking about is how unbeneficial they can be for you in sobriety.
You just kind of jumped in with we're at the library and then that was it. Are you saying that because we're video recording too and people that might be wondering about our background?
Or the echo. There's a little bit of an echo.
Oh, is there an echo? Yeah.
We were talking about tools that will help you eliminate the justified resentments in your life. And the reason being?
Well, resentments, we say in AA, are the number one offender, the number one thing that will cause us to do things that we'll regret later. Particularly, specifically in chemical addiction would be to use chemicals again.
And with relationships, it would be the reason why you might create in your head a scenario and then act on that scenario when that may not be actual fact of what's going on in your relationship. I'm reminded I've had some friends who 25 years after a divorce, they are still saying, I can't do X, or I can't do this, I can't leave the country, I can't get a job that I want because it would be displeasing to my ex-husband, or because my ex-husband said, I've always acted like this, so I always will act like that. Those are things that are keeping you stuck. So now we need some tools for how to get around these justified resentments.
Well, is that really a resentment, though, when they have this inability to take risks because of damage that has been caused? I don't necessarily associate that with a resentment. It's a form of baggage, to be sure, but when I think resentment, I think of anger directed at somebody.
This is anger that has turned inside on themselves and created identity. That's where I'm going with it, is because they hold this resentment, they've created an identity out of it.
So if this wife who can't travel because her husband said that she was never capable is saying to herself, I'm so angry that he caused me to feel this way or caused me to believe this, then I can see that as being a resentment. But I would say that person, if they're not able to make that connection to the negativity that was in their life prior, developing into a portion of their character, which they still care, if they can't make those connections and they just say, oh, well, I can't do that because I was told I can't do that, I don't know that is it may be a resentment in its truest form, but there may be work that needs to happen before, like becoming completely honest and realizing that God can make me well, and identifying this in our inventory.
So that leads me to the first tool. I think the first tool is listening to what you say about yourself. And I think we have a hard time doing that. If you start repeating something over and over again that you can or cannot do because of another person, because of another organization, or because of a situation, that has probably been a resentment that's been boiling in your life for a long time. So the first tool, I believe, is to listen to yourself, or go to trusted friends, maybe your sponsor, maybe your spouse, and say, what is it that I'm saying about myself that is something that I've been affected by another person, an organization, or something that I believe that is keeping me from acting on things that I also say I want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. If we're going to become focused in this, what we're trying to tackle, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this: now that we have resentment that's built up, that's become part of our personality, that sometimes we're invested in keeping.
Yes, we're often invested in keeping it because it keeps us from doing things that we're afraid of. We're invested in it because it's become part of our personality, but it's that double-edged sword. We may hate it and be invested in it at the same time.
Of something that we might all kind of carry around with us and it's become like a socially justifiable resentment, and it gives us comfort to have it there. But I'm struggling to think of one that's common.
Well, we see it sometimes with adults who, as children, their teachers or their guidance counselor or somebody told them, you need to be a janitor, you're never going to make it, you're going to do this. And they internalize that. They may or may not realize they're resentful on it.
That's
and
a good
then
point.
They choose.
What I'm seeing now is a hiring manager. Did I cut you off?
Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Uh-huh.
You're not building a resentment?
No, I'm not building a resentment. You paid for lunch.
All right. What I'm seeing as a hiring manager is a lot of young adults who are coming into the workforce with, degrees, and I think that they're trying to identify and define that they have a resentment, that they're not able to just enter the workforce in this field that they spent sometimes tens of thousands, if not over $100,000, becoming quote unquote certified and qualified to work in that field. And they're at entry level jobs that they could have very easily gotten had they never gone to school in the first place.
So that could be building a resentment against an organization and a cultural understanding that college is going to build you something you want.
A societal norm.
Okay, so a tool to work around that would be to realize it's there. How would you suggest somebody handle that?
Well, let's say that because this is I'm not a psychologist, but what I've seen the psychologist in my life do is just continue to ask Socratic or rabbinical questions until you get to the point where you realize that this is what's going on inside you the whole time. So, why don't you think that you were able to enter the workforce in that particular field? How does that make you feel that you can't enter the workforce in that particular field? Why did you choose to go to school and spend that kind of money? How does that make you feel that you made that choice? When you have to pay your monthly student loan debt, how do you feel about it? What do you wish you had done instead? And all these Socratic questions, which try and get you to the point, you know what? I'm pissed that guidance counselor told me that the only way I was going to make anything of myself was to go to college and become a civil engineer. And now I'm a civil engineer, and here I am working as a plow truck driver, using the endorsement that the company helped me to get. And it took 3 months, and I could have been doing that without having to pay a mortgage payment.
Right. Questioning the things that are coming out of your mouth. I think the second one is journaling. And then I think the third one is looking at people who you keep telling your story to. I think this is the biggest one. What is your story? And have somebody tell you back what your story is. Yeah. So here's one, I hope you're okay with this. You said to me one time, we were playing Little League ball and some things were going on, and we were sitting at home, and you said, I don't want to be the pothead dad. And that was the story you were beginning to tell yourself, was you're not showing up, and you're not at the games, and you're not doing this, and you're beginning to tell yourself this story. If you begin to tell yourself that story, oftentimes you live out that story. So that's the third tool in dealing with resentments, is what is that story that you're telling yourself? And you have choices.
Yeah, I want to back up a little bit though. So, because what I've been hammering out through the majority of this podcast is this idea of, I know that in my experience, one of the real challenges is to identify that I have resentments, quantify them, define them, put parameters on them. I don't necessarily need to know how they got formed, but I need to know that they're there. Because usually what I see happen is we don't have resentments, we have justifications. Well, this isn't a resentment. I'm just mad because this happened, and anybody would be mad, and that's perfectly normal, and I don't need to work on it. They need to work on it. They need to fix it, and then I can be well. Once they fix this problem that they've caused, then I can be well. The reality is we can't control what they do. We can only control how we react to it. And what we're doing is we're reacting in a self-destructive way, causing stress and anger and negative vibes or feelings in our life that are giving us a form of relief for a short time, because they are a way to vent energy, in this case, negative energy that we've created out. And by doing that, we have a sense of relief.
I think you just nailed it all. folds in with my story, and I think we've kind of got it. We can wrap this up in that you're giving your power over to somebody else by hanging on to justified or unjustified or whatever resentments you are allowing an institution, an organization, another person, or a situation to take control of your life and saying, if they would just get it fixed, then I could be well. And we've come to this in some other points. So if I'm hearing everything correctly, the tools that we're really talking about are identifying, that is identifying your story, what it is you are saying out loud, defining it. You'll have to help me here with quantifying it. How do you see quantifying it?
Well, to measure it, to say, here's how much time I give to this, here's how much energy it takes from me to really just become intimate with that resentment. I honestly, personally, once I developed the tools to deal with resentments before I recognized that I had any. So once I started to be able to become familiar with them and identify them, and like when you spend a lot of time in the woods and you see tracks and you're like, oh, look, it's an animal track. Well, one day you realize, oh, look, it's a 4-footed animal that walks with a traditional gait. And then another time you look and you say, oh, that's a deer because he's not doing a trot, he's doing a hop move. And then and the more time you spend, the more you're able to identify these things which have been there the whole time. You see, I remember the day I saw something move through the woods, and I knew it was a deer because it bounced over the horizon, as opposed to like an elk where the head kind of stays still and it moves in a straight line. The deers, when they're at that particular gait, bounce. And I said, oh, well, I know that that's a deer. Now, that I had been watching those things my whole life and not been able to identify them without perfect light and perfect conditions. And here I am being able to identify it at a glance all of a sudden. Same thing with my emotional territory and my emotional landscape. As I begin to start to define these resentments, these things that I am harboring, that I'm holding on to, and here's the real kicker, that I have the ability to let go of. But it's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not easy because as we started in the first segment of this podcast, oftentimes it becomes an identity. And what Jerry has said to me quite often is, how long are you going to rent space to that person, situation, or organization? If I come home all hot over what the DMV has done, or I got a speeding ticket, or this, that, and the other, there are consequences, and I can either choose to rent its space on a regular basis and retell that story over and over again, or I can say, I'm going to retell it 6 more times, and then I'm going to be done with it and let it go, and I'm not going to let it take up valuable space, because we can only hold so many things, take up valuable space in my psyche and in my understanding of the world. So I think we've got some great tools laid out, and I'm going to lay these out in words on the blog, but we would love to hear from you on the Sober on Purpose Facebook group.
Well, did we really cover a lot of tools? Because now, since this is a spontaneous and organic kind of podcast scenario where we don't really have an itinerary, it sounds to me like we could do a whole nother podcast and outline particular process of going about, now that we realize the paramount necessity of identifying resentments and putting parameters on them, instead of just being like, I'm angry at the system. And then it can become, well, I'm angry at Judge Smith, and I'm angry at Officer Johnson, because Officer Johnson wrote me that ticket, which put me in front of Judge Smith, and Judge Smith wasn't sympathetic of the fact that I couldn't make the first court appointment because I had Grandma Jones sick in the hospital, and I had to take care of Grandma Jones, and now I'm resentful of Grandma Jones. So rather than I'm just angry at the government, it needs to be more, more isolated and more defined. So now that we realize how important that is, should we do another podcast on, at that point, what do we do?
Alrighty, so we are moving into a third episode for Justified Resentments, going to present you with some more tools on how to handle that, so stay tuned. Please be sure and check into our Facebook group. It's a private group where you can talk back to us, and we would love to hear your suggestions on how you handle resentments and resentments that build into identities. We will be back next week with our third episode on resentments, a complicated process, one that takes a little bit to heal from. Be sure and check into the Facebook group, leave us a comment, and we so love your reviews. We're looking for some stars and some words, so be sure and click left or right to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll look forward to talking with you in the Facebook group.